Aloha, and welcome to this episode of Maunalua Past, Present, and Future. Brought to you by Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. My name is Chelsea Chang, a youth advisor and volunteer with Livable Hawaii Kai Hui, and your host for today's show, all about watershed restoration in the Koʻolau Mountains in East Oahu. If you could step back in time to the late 1800s through the first 2 decades of the 20th century, we probably would not recognize the Koʻolau Mountain and ridges separating Ka'alakei, Hahaione, Kamilonui, Kamiluiki, and Kalama valleys. The mountains and ridges were nearly denuded of their original vegetation by cattle, feral goats, and pigs. When we look at the Koʻolau Mountains covered with trees, shrubs, and grass, we see what appears to be a verdant forest, shrublands, and grasslands. But this would be misleading, because the plants in these areas, for the most part, are not native to Hawaii, like ironwood and silk oak, were planted for reforestation after the destruction of the native Hawaiian forests and shrublands by cattle, goats, and pigs. For today's program, we will be exploring one vision for these areas of the Koʻolau Mountains, east of Ka'alakei Valley to Makapu'u Point. So our guest for this evening is J.C. Watson with the Koʻolau Mountain Watershed Partnership.
Good evening.
And Geary, Mizuno, another volunteer with Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. Welcome.
Thanks.
So, JC, this is your first time here, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm the manager of the Koʻolau Mountains Watershed Partnership. And the Watershed Partnership is essentially a voluntary alliance of all of the major landowners that encompass the Koʻolau. So it stretches from East Oahu, Hawaii Kai, all the way to Kahuku, and encompasses about 110,000 acres. And it's a really, really awesome project, and I'm stoked to work for it. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, Geary, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
So what sparked your interest with this watershed program?
Well, I've always been interested in the Koʻolau Mountains and Hawaiian vegetation and Hawaiian plants in general from the time that I was a little kid. And through high school and college when I would be hiking in the Koʻolau Mountains. And I've always looked at the mountains behind Hawaii Kai, East Oahu, as being a place where we really could restore plants there. I mean, and certainly when I was growing up in the 60s, there were still a lot of native plants that were still sort of hanging on there. The forests that you see now, which were just starting to get to that point. They were just started, really. So that's really my interest. It sparked from my early childhood.
Wonderful. So, JC, what can you tell me about, just in general, the potential benefits of a watershed restoration?
Oh my goodness, where even to begin? So restoring watersheds, especially on a landscape scale, and well, let's just distill it down to just East Honolulu, just so I don't ramble for too long. The benefits are so numerous that I can't even talk about them all. You have potential benefits to water recharge rates. The Koʻolau Mountains provide the vast majority of the drinking water for Oahu. And once these valleys, lush and verdant, the streams which are intermittent today, were perennial, and you had freshwater springs, so you have the water resource, you have the recreational resource, the people enjoying the trees and the plants and exploring nature there. You have the benefit of having, if it was restored to a large degree, you have the benefits to the rare and endangered native plants, you have the benefits to the native birds. There's ʻelepaio in East Honolulu. Some of the densest populations of Oahu ʻelepaio are, in like Wailupe Valley, for example. So you have the benefits of the birds, you have the benefits to the people, then you have the cultural benefits as well that come along with replacing and restoring native forests too. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And so Geary, so what's your take on the watershed restoration in southeast of the Koʻolau Mountains?
Well, let me sort of add on a little bit to what JC was talking about with respect to the benefits. I mean, apart from everything he mentioned, there's the practical side of, fire control. Alien plants are much more susceptible to very fast and destructive wildfires, which can sweep down and threaten homes. And there's also the flood control aspect. Native forest has a much better capability to absorb precipitation, especially large precipitation events, and I shouldn't say prevent, but certainly reduce or mitigate the kinds of destructive floods that we've seen in the last 10 years. And certainly it's going to be even more of an issue with global warming. So my concept or my vision for East Oahu is basically to restore the native vegetation to the extent practical, so that we can achieve some of these benefits. The practical benefits, and as well as the cultural aspect. Of Native Hawaiians and people who are interested in learning about the culture, being able to go into the mountains and actually experience the plants and be able to collect them and to understand how things looked when the Native Hawaiians first came to Hawaii.
Yeah, well, I'll even add some more benefits there too. Sorry.
No, please, no, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, well, you have the benefits of flood and fire, but then you also have reduced erosion, which brings up water quality benefits, and then with reduced erosion, you have nearshore benefits too. You're not having sedimentation of the reef, and then you don't have that. You have a more productive fishery too. So that's like food resources as well.
I remember that Maunalua Bay has several fish ponds, and it's a prime recreation resource, a water recreation resource. Between canoeing and kayaking, swimming, surfing, you name it, fishing, and the quality of the water down in the Pacific, in Maunalua Bay, depends upon the quality of the watershed up above. That's why we have this concept called Maukatumakai as a concept, that we have to care for all of it.
Yeah, if the water coming out at the top is dirty, it's going to be dirty at the bottom.
Oh, I see. And so, Geary, this vision statement that you mentioned, how do we go about achieving that?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, you have to have people and organizations that are going to carry it out. And basically, I look at from mechanical standpoint, or if you want to call it how you actually do it, there are basically two things that I see that have to be accomplished. One is to remove, or at least control, non-native plants, the alien plants. And once you get them out, or in the course of taking them out, depending upon the nature of the situation, you're going to be outplanting native plants, either by putting in actual plants or reseeding.
Right.
So I look at it as those two separate things: removal or control of the non-native plants, and then the restoration of the native plants.
Right.
Yeah, and I would actually add a third component to that too, and that's engagement and education. Because when you're building a forest, it's going to grow in the timeline of a forest, and that's generational. So we gotta cultivate the plants and cultivate the people, and then that way we can grow the forest over time.
Right, and education. Education doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be in a classroom situation. It means that when you're walking, or if you're taking a trail or something, that there's interpretational materials available to you, or that there are people who are knowledgeable who are taking people up through that area, or or you have a halau going up and realizing, oh, this is what I was dancing about. Education can take many forms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned, to fulfill the vision statement, is that there is a major removal for alien plants. So JC, can you tell me what sort of plants that need to be taken out in order for the watershed to be restored?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a whole bunch of them. But in East Oahu, you're really going to be looking at, it's a drier landscape, so you're going to be looking at Koʻalau. You're going to be looking at Kiave. Tropical almond is present there too. It'll kind of take over the more coastal zones. What else do we got?
Although tropical almond actually does grow quite high up, because if you, for example, in the Hahaioni Valley or in the Ka'ivi Mauka lands, you can see them. They're going up the sides of the ridges. They might not be on the tops of the Koʻolau Mountains, but they're sitting right.
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 Interesting.
Yeah, they'll creep up there for sure. And then, of course, you have the Christmas berry is a pretty bad one in the Mauka regions. That one can even cause severe allergic reactions to people too. It's related to poison ivy, I believe, and mango and stuff like that. And then lantana, which is a pasture nuisance, but it also takes over the kind of shrubby zones. It's real spiky and
also deters hikers. So it's an impediment to using an area for recreation.
Yeah, and a lot of these trees are major water users too. Water users and losers. They soak up a lot of water and they lose a lot of water. So that further contributes to the drying out of the landscape.
Right. Yeah. In particular, Kiave has very deep tap roots, and Koʻalau also has the capability to get their roots down into the water zones, and they transpire a lot of water, so you can see these areas. The natives are having a hard time. They've been extirpated from those areas, even apart from the native. Apart from the feral animal problem, because now these alien plants, the non-native plants, have come in and they've removed the capability of the plants to actually get water. The native plants to actually get water.
Oh, interesting. So, about these alien plants and the non-native plants, how do they create a problem to restore a watershed?
Well, as Geary mentioned, they do outcompete and kind of force out the natives to a degree. But you got to realize that the landscape that we're dealing with now is the end result of a long period of degradation and change. So, during the ranching periods that, were in the area where there was widespread cattle grazing, the cattle ate all the native trees. And then the watersheds were really degraded. Then you have the forestry plantings, which, really did kind of save the watersheds. And now we're coming back in afterwards and trying to do this, replacement. So as far as the exact effects of the native species, they pretty much just force it out. They take up the space that the natives need to take up, and they don't function as efficiently as the native plants would in the same space.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, we didn't mention this this alien plant, but the ironwood plant, ironwood trees, their leaves have what they call allelopathic capability, which means that they have chemicals in them, so that when they drop to the ground, they actually deter other plants from growing underneath them. That's why when you walk through a ironwood grove, in Waimanalo, Bellows, or Kailua Beach, you don't see anything underneath them. It's because they have actually altered the chemical structure of the soil so that nothing grows under them. And you have them also on the top of the ko'olaus. So those would be things that you would have to remove as well.
Right.
And a lot of other non-native plants do have allelopathic properties.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, and so that's what you're doing as part of the partnership, right? Taking out the non-native plants and putting the native.
Exactly.
Okay, so what sort of native plants are you using as part of the revegetation effort?
So it will depend on the location, because you can't plant every plant in every place.
Right.
But in a drier area like the areas that we're talking about, you're going to look at these kind of hardy dry forest species. You're going to look at a'ali'i, which is a really good one. You're going to look at akia, that's another really good shrub. Then you start to get into tree species. Wili wili trees were a major component of dryland ecosystems. You have alahe'e trees as well. And then, the wili wilis are a really nice one. And, I like to imagine that East Honolulu was kind of a massive wili wili forest, just because I think it was. And you have, old wili wili trees in the back of Cocoa Crater even, that whole area was wili wili, so that's a really important one. But you'd have really cool dryland forms of ohia, lehua as well. which pretty much is ubiquitous everywhere in a Hawaiian forest.
The thing about alahe, it's a very strong thing. It was probably one of the last things to go along with a'ali'i. And I've seen photographs of at the turn around 1910 when they were just starting, when ranching basically was on the verge of becoming uneconomic because basically they had the cattle had eaten everything, and you'd see these pictures of alahe, one shrub of alahe growing on a cliff usually because the cattle hadn't gotten to them, but everything else has been eaten all around them.
Wow.
And so, but it's a beautiful shrub or small tree, and when it blooms, you can tell that it's blooming because it has just a tremendous fragrance, a wonderful fragrance.
Yeah, it smells a lot like the mock orange bushes.
Oh.
And it looks similar too. So, you know, anybody who's going to plant mock orange, you know, really should be planting alahe as well.
Yes.
So Geary, for what you see for the East Oahu Watershed restoration, are there any native plants in particular that you would like to see there?
Oh, I mean, apart from the ones that JC talked about, yeah, I think let me talk about three more. One would be ule, which actually is out there. I mean, you see it, you know, again, little pockets of it. And this is a plant that grows on ridges, and it usually you see it very prostrate, but it can actually grow into a tall shrub that's maybe 10 feet high, 12 feet high. So that would be one. Then towards the higher areas where there's a little bit more water, you could plant koa. Koa would be certainly entirely appropriate. Again, a beautiful tree. Maybe you're not going to get the kind of stature that you get on the Big Island, you know, these tall bold trees. Those require a lot more water. And the Oahu trees tend to be more picturesque. But they were still, again, part of the landscape, you know, the original landscape here. And then another tree which most people don't know of, and it's kind of hard to find. Certainly, I haven't seen one in the field.
I've never seen one in the wild.
I've only seen, you know, cultivated things. I haven't gone to Awahi on Maui, where there are a lot of wild ones. But this plant is called Ohemakai, and it's actually related to alani, which is a native plant that has a very it's in the orange family, and also related to mokihana, distantly related. They're sort of in the same family, orange family. Rue family, I should say. So those would be plants that would be you would typically find in a dry forest or, you know, a dry setting.
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
those would be really cool ones. Yeah, I mean the native dry forests were some of the most diverse forests that existed in the island. So there's no shortage of plants that we can talk about. But we can take up the whole rest of this show just talking about plants.
I mean, ultimately, in a restoration context, you know, we want to choose plants which are really hardy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most Hawaiian plants are not fire resistant, but we want to at least get plants that are not going to burn really quickly.
Yeah, we can get plants that are maybe not fire resistant, but they also aren't fire adapted. Where you get into a fire grass cycle, for example, where the grass is stimulated by the fire and grows more robust than if it didn't have a fire. So our native plants don't do that. But try to avoid that situation.
And we also just want to get stuff that, you know, hopefully grows quickly so that it will prevent the aliens from reinvading. So that's, you know, there are all these different species that we could use, but, you know, we want to at least at the beginning try and get things which are easily propagated, have a good success rate of being outplanted or otherwise seeding and then getting them done.
Right.
Yeah.
And so tell me about the timeline for all of this, for the restoration of the East Oahu Watershed. What needs to happen first, and we take it from there.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is you need an organization to take on the kuleana. And you need individuals within these organizations and partnerships to be willing to put the effort forward to actually doing the work.
Right.
So that's kind of step one, which Livable Hawaii Kai Hui is a really, really good example of, you know, this kind of collaborative hui, dedicated to doing this. So you have the organization, then you need to, you know, address the sources of plants and who's going to be doing the work. But as far as where to start, you start pretty much where you can access, and you get a foothold and you start to build some momentum. And you really, it's about tipping points. It's about getting into an area and with the end goal of the natives tipping the scales to outcompete the invasives.
Right.
And they can. And if you look farther up in the Koʻolaus or in other coastal systems are a really good example. The alpaca in the coastal zone will crowd out pretty much everything. And then you have these other native vines come in and the coastal systems can maintain. The dry forest systems can do that too. It's just that those systems were so degraded with ranching that it's kind of like the scale's way on this side. And you just got to get up and get it back. But the timeline for that is, it is a generational shift. We have to function and work on the time scale of a forest. You can plant a tree, and it'll be this tall. It won't be massive until my grandkids will sit under it. So, you're looking at, 3 generations before a forest becomes a functional forest.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm thinking that when I tell people how long this might take, I said, well, certainly beyond my lifetime, and I'm saying just as a rough guess, and looking at, funding and just the basic nature, the biology of a forest and how you get it there, I'd say about 150 years.
150, wow.
You have to have, but most people who love plants and forests, they have that kind of timeline, and they understand that it takes a time, that kind of time and that kind of, vision to be able to see that your efforts are going to be achieved over that span of time.
Yeah, we're not growing corn on an annual scale.
Right. Right. So, are there any thoughts that something that you want to emphasize a little bit more to our viewers that all about this entire thing?
Well, I guess first is, viewers, get out there and enjoy your watersheds, enjoy your forests, plant native plants.
Yeah, I think I would say the same thing. Get out there, but then, most people who, and this is not a knock on them, okay, but they don't know the difference between a native plant and a non-native plant because they haven't been taught. They'll walk around and say, whatever common plant, monkey pod. Oh, that's a native plant.
Plumeria.
It's everywhere, yes, but it's not native, okay? And so I think the idea is that if you can find a mentor or someone, an educator of some sort that can take you out and talk to you about the natural history of Hawaii, because Hawaii is a very special place. We're very isolated, and the plants, the animals, the insects, the invertebrates that came here and colonized and then ultimately branched out and created their own species, most of them are found nowhere else in the world. Even the indigenous of things, you don't just look at one particular species. It's an assemblage. They created a forest. They created a shrubland. They created a grassland. They created a wetland that was unique to Hawaii in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is one of the better examples that I've heard of the benefits of natives is that assemblage. Because you can have a croton in your garden, and that's cool, but you can have an assemblage of native plants, and that's really something special. So, yeah, I get all excited about native plants.
We can tell.
Yeah.
So if anyone from our audience would like to contact JC for more information on what he discussed on our show, or for more information about the Koʻolau Mountains Watershed Partnership, his contact information is on the screen, right there.
And yeah, we at the Watershed Partnership, we also have volunteer events and outreach things. So we frequently have booths at different events and stuff, but we have, people can check out the events calendar on our website. We have volunteer work events at our various restoration sites about twice a month.
Oh, interesting. What kind of activities are they doing there?
Everything from planting native plants to invasive species removal. Sometimes, there's always an interpretive hiking component. We go up, we enjoy the view. We talk about plants. We talk about species assemblages. We talk about the cultural and the history of the site. So there's pretty much all of that. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So any of our viewers at home, please come on out to anything that JC just said. So first I would say big mahalo to JC Watson and Geary Mizuno for joining us this evening and for providing those beautiful visuals. And also a big mahalo to the folks at Ōlelo Studios in Kaimuki, to our viewers at home, and Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. My name is Chelsea Chang, and I was your host for this evening. And until next time, a hui ho.